of the zoning ordinance text. State law provides an avenue of review through the Zoning Board of Appeals. Unlike a decision by the Planning Commission that must be approved or can be overturned by the City Commission, the decision by the Zoning Board of Appeals is final. There is no review or opportunity for overturning by the City Commission. The Michigan Zoning Enabling Act provides that Section 606.3, an appeal for a decision by the Zoning Board of Appeals shall be filed within 30 days after the Zoning Board of Appeals issues its decision in writing, signed by the chairperson, if there is a chairperson, or signed by the members of the Zoning Board of Appeals if there is no chairperson, or within 21 days after the Zoning Board of Appeals approved the minutes of its decision. The court may affirm, reverse, or modify the decision of the Zoning Board of Appeals. The court may make other orders as justice requires. Okay, we have minutes from 6/26/19. I hear a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, motion by Scott,
Second.
supported by Tom. All in favor? Any changes or anything before I? No? Okay, all in favor? Say yay.
Aye.
All opposed? Nay. Minutes are approved. We have a section for general public comment for anyone who wants to speak that's not related to anything on the agenda tonight. It's just kind of a public comment time if there is anyone. So, well, doesn't look like it, so we'll proceed on. Okay, first on the agenda is 3393 Remembrance Road. That was tabled on 6/26. I need a motion to untable it.
Motion to take it off the table.
Roger, motion to untable.
I'll support.
Supported by Pat. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? It's on table. Okay, applicants Michael Smith and Brad Lawrence on behalf of owner Bosworth Builders LLC and Tiny Giant Leasing LLC have applied to establish that a proposed use with small batch beer brewing, ingredient and beer packaging and storage, commercial sales, and future on-site sampling is similar to the principal uses permitted in and compatible with the intent of the C3 zoning district under section 94-178B10 regarding the subject lot at 3393 Remembrance Road Northwest, Zone C3, highway commercial and a single-family residential. The applicant has presented the facts, including the new information on pages 13 through 21 of the application. Dan, is there anything you'd like to add?
I will try to make it quick. We have 3 cases on our agenda tonight, so I won't spend a lot of time going over the analysis on this one, but I encourage some thoughtful conversation from the ZBA and the applicant. That being said, I'll jump right into it. We're again looking at the site here at the intersection of Ripens and Remembrance with Everett Street to the rear, a commercially zoned lot with some residential zoning in the back that kind of works as a buffer. Long-established neighborhood in the Leonard Gardens home sites plat to the rear, and then there's some long-established housing and a mix of commercial and other uses across the street. So the role that the ZBA is asked to perform here is to interpret the zoning ordinance text and map, and specifically the zoning ordinance, to determine whether the proposed use here, which is, as they said, small batch beer brewing and related uses, fits within that C3 zoning district within our zoning ordinance. Here's a brief description of the use. There's small batch beer brewing, related ingredient and beer packaging and storage, commercial sales, future on-site sampling and tasting room. A more exhaustive description here. I just wanted to include this slide to show that there was a correction from what was in the packet last time. There are not sales of ingredients and production equipment, just storage of ingredients and production equipment. The sales is strictly beer. So what was asked for at the last meeting was a few items to help guide this discussion a little bit further. meeting summary, and I realize that that really is just articulated in the minutes. You can refer back to the minutes from 6/26 to see where the discussion went at that time. A summary of the liquor store, party store, convenience store definition within Walker, and I provided some background information to establish a more definitive idea of what that means for Walker in your packet. The third one is clarification of the proposed use from the applicant, and the applicant provided two main things to help to state that further. There was the more detailed floor plan that was provided, and there were some new example projects that were provided to show a more descriptive example of what this use is. So those two things kind of compose that third check mark, the clarification of the proposed use. Planning Commissioner input, I did share this use description, and I walked the site with our Planning Commission chair, and I also shared this with our vice chair, just to get some of that preliminary feedback from a spatial analysis and Planning Commission standpoint. We're not having a full throttle discussion with the Planning Commission at this time, and there's been no open Planning Commission meetings about the project, but there has been some discussion and just keeping some of the key planning commissioners kind of more in the loop. The Planning Commission chair walked the site, and some of the impression that he had was that this is sort of a spatially sensitive site that we should be careful with. Be careful with things like the potential odor that could be produced from beer production, but also that this is kind of a unique use that could be a special use, or it could be at least something that should go through a site plan review process with the Planning Commission. So based on that input and based on some more analysis on my end, I would say that's appropriate. If the outcome of this review is to consider approving this from a use standpoint, then it should still go through a site plan review from a kind of a spatial analysis and site assessment standpoint with the Planning Commission. And then finally, a revised decision template or motion sheet that has also been provided. So all of the tabling conditions, we were able to get those pulled together for tonight's meeting. Just a quick couple of slides here on new information provided by the applicant. There's been a new description, some new case study references. I added this message from the applicant into your slide deck. They make some distinctions here. They do call out that they are producing under 3 barrels per batch and less than 2,000 barrels per year. So this is technically even smaller than a microbrewery, something that might be called a nano brewery in some places. But as they say, the intent is not to be a large-scale brewery, but a small-scale artisan brewery with on-site sales of beer. They give some more examples, and there's an image from one of these sites in your packet. I did not put on the slides, but it shows sort of a gathering space with cases of beer for sale in the same area. So that's kind of the flavor I think that they're trying to describe here. And if you go to their next main submittal here was the detailed floor plan. This is more detailed than what was previously provided. Gives you a sense that this is not a large-scale manufacturing use. For one thing, you couldn't really put a large-scale manufacturing use in that building. But it does show that there's a point of sale area toward the front, sales counter, and then what I presume will grow into more of a service area over time on the east end of the site. So this gives you an idea that the floor plan is primarily sales and service oriented. I'll have some other comments on that. I guess what I'd like to do is just boil down my recommendations based on these submittals into one slide here and say, I apologize for minimizing that, but there are conditions related to the use aspect of this that I would encourage the ZBA to consider if they're inclined to conditionally approve this use. Of course, some of this is redundant, you'd have to do it anyway, but make sure that it's on record that any MLCC license or license from the state of Michigan will require appropriate city review. I do recommend site plan review by the Walker Planning Commission, and this is where we can address issues of parking, performance standards related to noise, vibration, odor, things like that. The use of the accessory building in the rear, buffering and kind of screening certain sensitive aspects of the site. Limits on hours of operation according to the request. That's normally the kind of thing you do with a special use permit, where you're kind of looking at operational standards related to a specific use. It would be appropriate to impose that as a condition as well, based on what they've provided you. I think the benefit of doing that is making sure that there are limits on this use, so that you're not spilling those hours into more of a time frame that would be either a more intensive production time or a more intensive bar type sales and service time. Perhaps you could say that the sales and commercial operating hours can be flexible as long as there's limits on kind of the service end of that, and there should be limits on the production end based on what they say in there, which is 8 a.m. to 7 p.m., not to exceed on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. I think that would make it so that the use is appropriately limited, so that you're not looking at really an industrial site or a bar. Limiting the service area to 25% in terms of on-site service area. You know, in addition to this requiring a future MLCC license for on-site sales or sampling or tasting, I think it'd be an additional benefit to limiting this use to say that that service area where there may be tasting should be no more than 25% of the floor plan. That will ensure that what you're looking at is really not set up to be growing into more of a brew pub bar type of aesthetic, which is limited to other zoning districts in Walker. Noise ordinance compliance is another sort of redundant thing that we'll ask for in any site plan. But if you're so inclined, I guess what I would recommend is to hear from the applicant again, and then rule out that what you're looking at is not a conventionally understood liquor store. It's not a conventionally understood bar, and it's not a conventionally understood brewery where the intent is to do large-scale manufacturing of a beer product. I think I'm comfortable enough that you're looking at really more of a scaled-back version of all three of those things, and also kind of a retail aspect that separates this use from some of those other definitions. And I think a judge-similar determination with some conditions could be appropriate here. But I'll leave that up to the ZBA to talk through and consider further.
Thank you, Dan. Okay, I need a motion to open the hearing.
Make a motion.
Motion by Elena,
Motion to open the meeting.
supported by Roger. All in favor of opening the meeting? Say
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting's open. Okay, is there anything that either of you guys would like to add to what Dan said?
Good evening. Thanks again for having me. I'm Michael Smith, co-applicant.
Brad Lawrence. Thank you for being willing to hear this again. I apologize for not being present last week for medical reasons.
Fine.
So at the end of the day, we have no desire to be a full-blown pub bar. We don't want to tag ourselves with that language or definitions. We have no plans to have a huge wait staff, bartenders, etc. Our goal is to serve the community, local area with artisanal beer for to-go consumption. And then the tasting room itself would really just provide an opportunity for new customers, not that aren't
Not familiar with the
Familiar.
product. That way they would be able to try something if they were to see it up on the board, or be able to purchase something to be able to try it before they buy it. We are in no means trying to put a bar there so people come in and spend 4 or 5 hours drinking pints of beer. This is a sampling of the product to be able to decide what you'd like to purchase and then leave.
Okay. Is there anyone else in the audience that'd like to address? I think last time we had that one lady, but I don't see her, so. Okay, well, I guess we'll turn over to the board if there's questions. Kind of went over it a couple of weeks ago, but I'm not sure who you weren't here with.
No, I was
Yeah,
at,
so,
I read all of it.
did you?
I'm familiar with the building too.
Did you, when Dan had his recommendations up, did you understand all those? I mean, is there anything that you have questions on, or you'd like?
No, we actually discussed that previously. Dan had sent us the slide before, and we
Okay.
would absolutely agree with that. And even to discuss the potential odor, our brewing system would only be one barrel, which is roughly 32 gallons. If you have any friends or neighbors who are home brewers currently, that's anywhere between 5 and 10 gallons boiling at a time. If you walk by someplace like Founders downtown, you're talking about 600 barrels or more boiling at a time, which is why you get that extreme odor, noise factor going on. This would be a very small production, and we do agree with everything that was up there that was presented as potential further review contingencies.
Okay.
How is that vented? What odors or fumes are created? How is that is that vented into the general area or out the back? Or?
So the venting only occurs during boiling, and boiling happens for 1 hour of the brew process. Our production is set up to brew between 1 batch and 4 batches per week, so that's about 4 hours of boil time. The venting is only done during that boil time, and it would happen through a vent similar to what you would have in a kitchen vent. Kitchen vent would be straight out through the ceiling.
So when you say out through the ceiling, would that go out through the wall then, ceiling out the gable, or out through the roof, higher than, would we vent it through the shingled roof that you have there? Or?
Yeah, we would vent it all the way up to the roof.
So it'll be quite high, right?
Yes.
It's gonna be, what do you got, 10-foot walls there maybe, or 9 plus?
It's 10-foot ceilings plus on top of the rafters, so you're looking at probably 14 to 15 feet from where the vent would be.
Plus if that vent is extended, like, I mean, is that like a PVC pipe, or don't you know?
Typically stainless,
Stainless, oh, okay. So then it'll have a rain cap on it probably too?
yes.
Okay.
Anything else?
Is there anybody else in Grand Rapids or in West Michigan doing this, or what you guys are proposing, or have done, or similar?
Not exactly like this. It's something that we've been passionate about for a while. It's very popular on the East Coast of the United States right now. They have much fewer of what we consider breweries here, where you go in, you get pizza, and you have 20 different beers to have. Out there, it's more about artisan production of beer. Buy a can, go about your life. Go canoeing, go camping, go back and have a fire with your friends, drink it at home with dinner. It's not about setting up a bar area. It's pretty singular to this area. But yeah, it's about providing a high-end product and freshness.
I mean, in Western Michigan, so one of the examples we put up there was Transient. So they have a similar model in the sense where they don't serve any food. Their focus is solely on beer. There's a newer brewery in Lowell, which is the New Union Brewery. You can go on their website and actually read there that, again, their focus is beer, and they have no desire to do food at this time. So I think that there is a trend moving away from the traditional brew pub that right now is all over Grand Rapids.
Thank you.
Okay. Roger?
I think, the only additional condition that I would impose on this is that they, in order for this, ruling to be accepted, is that the applicant actually purchase the property. He had intent to purchase it, but if you don't purchase it, then to me, this shouldn't go through. Shouldn't be just for that property. Can we do that?
It's an interesting question. I don't know, and I don't feel comfortable saying yes. I don't know if we can impose a condition of ownership tied to the use. Maybe you can
Are we
scratch that.
judging this similar for the zoning, or are we judging this similar for this property in that location?
For the zoning,
So anywhere there's C3 zoning.
no, I'm sorry, that's a good question. Each judge similar case will be decided based on the specific requirements request. So there's a specific description of a use that would plug into a judge similar determination. It's not the same as making a text amendment to the zoning ordinance.
But this request is made by this applicant. So can't we restrict this ruling to this applicant?
I think this would run with the property.
Well, is it different than a dimensional variance? I mean, it is, right? I mean, this is a use variance, right?
It's not even a use variance. The idea here is
Judge
that you are not, you're identifying that this use is not something that's clearly only allowed in another zoning district or other zoning districts. You're saying that this use is not really defined, but it could be allowed in this zoning district based on this specific description. I guess, Roger, one thing that raises a good question is if this use was proposed on a very similar lot elsewhere in C3 zoning by the same applicants with the same business model, would it come back to the ZBA? That may be a judgment call on the behalf of the zoning administrator at that time, but each judge similar decision falls upon an individual parcel based on that request.
Well, but we're judging this similar, assuming we judge this similar, based on their application, their business model.
Yeah.
If they don't purchase the property and they don't do this, if somebody else comes in, wants to put a nano or microbrewery in there and has a different business plan, and we've already ruled that it's similar, they can go ahead and do what they want.
Well, that would be a change of use that we would pick up on. I guess it would be enforceable. We don't necessarily oversee every real estate transaction or every new lease that goes into a property, but at the time that business applied for a business license application, we would be able to pick up on that. The Community Development Department office has to sign off on new businesses, so we would see a transfer of ownership or a transfer of lease to a different business, and at that point we could inquire and make sure that they're still falling within that confine that's been described for this application. That's something within our purview as staff to do, and if they don't, we could call that a significant change of use.
So this application though becomes the basis or standard for the judge similar. Is that correct?
Yes. That's the way I would look at it.
And just to add, we do have an accepted offer with the only pending contingency being the finding of your zoning board. So once the zoning board, if you were to find in favor of our business, the purchase would be pending by the end of the month, and we would be contractually obligated at that point.
So, Rod, you could probably condition it on that if you wanted to, if it made you feel better, on closing and sale of their purchase agreement. I mean, well, I can
Well, if
see.
they want to do condition
Okay.
it on the basis.
I mean, you could
follow-
add that
follow
condition
through
to them, and
with
I don't,
purchasing it.
it sounds like they're not gonna buy the building if they can't do it, but they're willing to buy the building. Correct me if I'm wrong, if they get through all our stuff at the city of Walker, which would be us and the planning
Would we
commission.
judge it similar if they did not intend to buy it, if they were,
Well, that's a great question, because,
if they were only going to lease the property?
well, but what if okay, so I got a commercial building in a C3 zone up off Alpine, and they came to me and wanted to put this in. I don't wanna sell my building, but I wouldn't mind leasing these gentlemen 3,000 square feet, and then they'd have to come and do that. So, I mean, to me, that, they'd still do the same steps. I guess if I had a building of my own that I wanted to lease to them, they'd have to come through the same steps, right, Dan, and come to see us anyway? If I had a building in C3, and I wanted to lease it to these two men, I don't wanna sell it to them because I got a 10,000 square foot building.
Okay.
And I think, but, so I guess I hope that I don't know if that's helping or not with the use thing or the judge similar thing.
Well,
But then
think
we control it, right?
in your example,
Then
you'd
if
be looking at a
if I
different.
get out of their lease, the new tenant that I sell them afterwards, they're not, they're gonna have to get a new lease with me, and then they're gonna have to come and get a business license here, and then it's all gonna start all over. And the new tenant's not gonna agree to what we tell them to agree, hours, time of use.
Yeah, but if you
Think about
already
that.
own a building and it has a use, then you're looking for a use permit, where they're looking for a judge similar.
Well, in Randy's example, I'm trying to think here, so there's a description that goes with any attempted occupancy of a site, and I think if you're talking about this business fitting into a larger site as part of a mixed use, then that kind of resets the clock, or this business expanding into a larger C3 site. I think what you're judging is the similarity to C3 zoning based on the specific square footage, the specific stated amount of barrels per day that's tied to this application. Now, there's another way this could pan out in the future, is that we could take this up with ordinance committee and say that anywhere where you have a nano brewery, or anywhere that you have a brewery mixed with service and sales floor, with kind of a more general statement of the use, is permitted in C3. That may be something we do eventually, but until we do that, each judge similar case is based on the specific application for the specific site, and that's what we're going off of here. And if this site changes ownership or changes tenancy, the new business owner would still be required to turn in a business license application. We'd check that for zoning, and if they change how they're using the building, then we could bring it back to the ZBA. That seems like an unlikely scenario, but you have to think things through like that, so I'm glad you brought it up.
Isn't their liquor license, is their liquor license determined to this property?
I think it would be.
Actually, brewery licenses are tied to the brewery itself, not the property.
Okay.
So if we moved eventually the brewery,
You take the license?
we would take the license, it would not hang with the building.
There you go.
All of
Another
the
checks and
licenses.
balances, right? Is that another check and balance for that? A little bit?
I don't see how you would tie in ownership of the building very easily. I mean, these guys could set up a separate entity to buy the building and lease it to themselves, have a separate entity to do the operating, and it just becomes convoluted. And there would never realistically be a connection between what they're trying to do and who owns the building. There could be, but there might not be, or it could change.
So,
Okay.
I think it sounds like, well, the decision point is if we can tie this specific request based on the use to this property, and that would be my recommendation. I think you can look at each judge similar for each site based on how they describe their use for each site.
Okay, motion to close the hearing?
Motion to close the hearing.
Support.
Motion by Tom, supported by Elena. In favor of closing the hearing? Aye. All opposed? Hearing's closed. So, any thoughts? Roger? Good.
Quick public service announcement, if you can just make sure you're pressing that big button on your microphone. Lights up, we'll hear you better on the recording.
Okay. Anyone got any additional comments?
I'm all set.
Okay,
I know I wasn't here last week, but I did read through that.
Okay.
So-
anyone care to make a motion?
So, Mr. Chairman, if we were to use this format, do we just kind of read through this and circle the approve and will nots, or do we read it that way, or?
Yes,
Asking me?
Yes.
I'll try
Yep.
to respond here. Yeah, I think, and it is kind of lengthy, and that speaks to our last conversation. This is a very specific proposal, so, yeah, I would encourage you to use that. And then we have a more simple motion sheet that, depending on the decision, the applicant could just sign off on a motion sheet with conditions, or a decision in order sheet is what that's called. But to come to your decision, I would encourage you to verify you agree with these findings of fact that are listed there.
okay.
Would we take each bullet point individually then, and, I mean, is that,
I would just encourage you to
or are the
maybe,
highlighted ones the ones that, I guess that's my
Yeah.
question, if I wanted to read this, can I just say the highlighted wills and will nots apply?
yeah, I would encourage you to do that, and the highlighted wills and will nots are the positive findings.
Okay.
And if you read those and then just give some time for some reflection, people can consider whether they have sticking points on any of them. You can talk about that. But if the general consensus is that you agree with those findings, then I think what those findings are doing for you is ruling out that this is not a use that belongs somewhere else.
And if we work through these will pretty much cover those conditions that you had on that previous slide, or do we have to add those maybe on the second page? Okay.
Yep, I do say, and you can just say recommendations of the planning director in terms of those conditions. If you agree with those ones, yes, you can do that.
Okay.
And you can shorten this up even more by saying you make a motion to approve or deny the request by the applicants, because we already stated what the request was. So approve or deny the request by the applicants, and then you can read the findings of fact.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, may I make a motion then?
Yes, sir.
I'll try to plot through this. Okay, I make a motion to approve the request by the applicants, based on the finding of the facts. Do I have to read this section? These two sections here, the 94 section, 178A and B. Okay. The proposed use will primarily involve on-site sales of products, service and exchange of goods for payment on-site.
Okay,
The next one is manufacturing and processing activities will be sufficiently limited within the building in a manner comparable to those areas within typical bakeries, meat markets, coffee shops, and food stores. Manufacturing and processing activities will not generate significant noise, odor, or vibration.
what's significant?
Some of this is meant to lead you to one of the conditions, which is that there's going to be a recommended site plan review.
Okay,
So I think you can make these findings resting on the comfort that there will be a site plan review to make
Okay.
sure the adjacency of this use doesn't butt up against the neighboring properties and shake and cause odor on those properties.
Okay,
those
thank
kinds
you.
of things.
Next item, manufacturing and processing activities will be substantially buffered from adjacent residential land uses, particularly those existing to the rear and side of the subject site. Next item, the proposed use will allow for safe and accessible vehicular circulation to and from the site. Next item, the proposed use will allow for safe and accessible vehicular circulation to and from adjacent sites. That's the one particularly to the east, I would assume, right? The subject site will allow for sufficient vehicular parking. Outdoor sales will not be a significant component of the future growth of this business. Outdoor sales will not be a significant component of the future growth of this business. So that means they can't go outside and taste test their thing? Is that what that means?
Yeah, well, just for example, in some other commercial zoning districts, there's an allowance for some limited outdoor seating with restaurants. I think we passed an ordinance a couple of years ago that kind of clarifies that. You can have up to, I think it's 25% of your floor area can be seats outside and things like that. This is one of those that's kind of redundant because their floor plan doesn't show any outdoor seating, but just to show this isn't going to be a kind of an outdoor bar or outdoor lounge area.
Okay. The proposed use will not primarily involve the manufacturing of products for off-site distribution and exchange of goods for payment at a different location. Next is the proposed production and sale of alcoholic products at the site will be consistent with a C3 zone district intent and permitted principal uses in the C3 district. Next item is the proposed use will not resemble a bar or nightclub use based on patterns and hours of usage in the site and limits on licensure for on-site consumption of alcoholic beverages. That's a mouthful. So we limited all that somewhere, right? Or that's what we're gonna do with the conditions? We're limiting all that? Is that coming there pretty, okay, it's coming in the back there?
of their application.
It's in the conditions.
Okay.
Licenses they're looking for.
Okay. And I think finally in this findings of the fact, the proposed use will not resemble a liquor store / convenience store / party store and will not include the sale of spirits for off-site consumption. We go through these recommendations then? Or can we absorb those all as one? Or do you want to do this individually?
Yeah, those are just a bullet list of the recommendations in my report. So if you agree with those, you can just say that you recommend the conditions recommended by the planning director.
So yes, I would make that. A part of this motion is that the planning director's recommended conditions be added to this motion, of which there are what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them?
Most important probably being the site plan review with the planning commission.
That's in there,
Yeah.
right? You don't have to add that, that's already in there? Okay. There's my motion.
Okay, we have a motion by Randy. Do we have support?
I'll support that.
Supported by Scott. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, passed. Okay, just need a signature up here with Roger if we could.
Your signature.
I do too.
And do they have to go to the planning commission next, Dan?
Yep.
They on the-
We'll be in touch about scheduling that or hearing from the planning commission.
Cool.
Earlier in August.
Okay, second item on the agenda is 4039 Bulrush Drive. Applicants here. Applicant and owner Tiffany Imhoff has applied seeking to construct a 16 by 32 in-ground pool which extends up to 12 foot into a required front yard on the property located at 4039 Bulrush Drive Northwest, contrary to section 9433.8B of the Walker zoning ordinance, which requires pools to be constructed in the rear yard. The subject lot is zoned SA, suburban single-family residential. Okay, exceptional or extraordinary circumstances. They state that our lot is a corner lot which results in 2 front yards and a smaller irregular sized backyard. We have a natural slope that is about 1/3 of the backyard, resulting in concerns of erosion and insurmountable retaining wall that would need to be specifically engineered due to the need height if it were to go into the naturally sloping area, as well as potentially a safety hazard and an eyesore. The majority of the pool, including concrete, would remain within the backyard. Only a small amount of footage, plus or minus 8.5 foot, would extend into the side yard, the second front yard, utilized for this accessory that most lots have the option of easily installing under typical lot circumstances. Preservation of rights. Most typical or standard lots allow for this type of accessory of this common size or even larger, easily to be added to the property. Many residents in the neighborhood already have an accessory or more than one, such as this in their yards, even in spots that may not be within zoning regulations. Walker has also previously approved a variance installation of a pool in the front yard for the address of 3464 Springbrook Drive, which falls within the same zoning regulations to my knowledge. Installing a pool will allow us to provide therapy for our son with high-functioning autism, healthy recreation, and entertainment while still ensuring peaceful living to all the surrounding neighbors. We feel as though this will uphold the quality character of the neighborhood and will not have any negative adverse effects on or nor alter the natural lot or the neighborhood, as the majority of the pool will be in the backyard. No detriment. Installation of the pool will be done by a licensed and insured company that will fall within all zoning requirements. We will gladly install proper fencing with privacy shading if necessary in the areas that extend into the second front yard to serve as a privacy barrier and stay within the Walker zoning regulations for fencing. The pool will be secured by a locking gate as well. Many residents in the neighborhood already have this type of accessory. This may even add value to our community as we enjoy hosting friendly get-togethers, as well as provide added value and enjoyment to the property neighborhood for possible future homeowners, if and when applicable. Not a general problem. Our request is unique and not necessarily an ordinance change due to the small amount of footage that the pool would extend into the second front yard to avoid going into the naturally sloping area of our lot, as well as eliminating the need for an engineering retaining wall that would need to be 6 to 7 foot high. This also allows for us to have a common accessory that many neighbors without an odd-shaped or unique lot already enjoy. Our request for a variance is relatively minor and clearly compiles with other zoning regulations as noted in section 94.338A of the Walker zoning ordinance. Okay, we have 5 letters from neighbors that are in the packet. I won't read through each one. I think there's some that support and some that don't, so I don't know if you had a chance to read them. Okay, Dan, is there anything you'd like to add?
Sure. Thanks for your patience, everybody. This is more of a typical kind of request that this board sees. I'll say that sometimes we get requests for things that jut out into the wrong yard, and that's a much more common type of what we call dimensional variance. The chair read out loud some responses to 4 different things that the ZBA has to agree with, more or less, to grant their request. There are 4 criteria that I'll run through associated with any dimensional variance, which is really just a term for a request to stretch beyond the limits of some numbers and some layout regulations that are in the zoning ordinance. And so in this case, we're talking about allowing a pool to encroach into the 35-foot front yard setback on a corner lot. There's a collection of images here of the property, puts you a little bit into the context of the site. This one might be the most telling. It shows that along the yard, where they're proposing to have this pool installed. If you can ignore that play structure, except for the fact that it provides some scale to show you that you're going up a hill there, I believe the intent would be to relocate that play structure. I think they would have to. But this just shows you that there is a steep incline in the side yard there. There is a corrected plan that I printed out copies of, and I hope this is the right one. The request is to have a layout that's like this. This rectangle really represents the open water, which in my interpretation is where the pool is. And so there'd be a concrete apron around that. And in my scaling of this image, I figured that it's probably up to 12 feet into the front yard, and that's being conservative. They estimate that it's closer to 8.5 feet. So the notice was submitted based on this image and saying up to 12 feet. That gives you a little bit of wiggle room based on this kind of image that doesn't provide exact scaling. So I'll jump into the dimensional variance criteria. The first one that we look at is something called exceptional or extraordinary circumstances. And this is to say that there's something unique or exceptional about the property that is not shared by other properties in this zoning district. And I think there's two things going on here that feed into this question. Steep slope in the yard where you're supposed to put the thing you want to have, and the fact that you have a corner lot, meaning that there's less yard available for the thing that you want to have. That's true of any corner lot. But just because there's fewer corner lots than there are interior lots, you can sort of call that an exceptional circumstance, more or less. Every corner lot is a little bit more restricted than its neighbors that don't line two streets. This topography is probably not 100% accurate, but it does show you that little V up, got the wrong mouse, there's a little upside down V shape. That anytime you see a contour or signature like that, that shows slope. In this case, the water or whatever's going in one direction or another is going downhill that way. So it does show that side yard slope that they show on the screen. So slope and being a corner lot are the things that I think stick out here. So you could probably make a case that there is an exceptionally limited lot. But here's where you get into more decision point, and in my opinion, something that's not quite fleshed out. Is this a right that's shared generally by properties in the same zoning district and in the vicinity? Is a pool something that you expect to have on a residential lot, sort of by right as an accessory use? Well, this image shows that in the area you have the same zoning district kind of from the Cummings over to Sunset Hills and up to Lake Michigan Drive. There's a lot of this zone district. There's two plat developments that I focused in on for this image. I didn't look at the rest of the yellow, but the stuff inside those bold black lines, out of the roughly 108 lots there's about 22 pools. And there might be a higher density of those in this plat. The applicant has probably more anecdotal, sees what's on the ground there. This is just based on an aerial map from a few years ago, so there may be more than I'm showing here. But this is just showing that, pools are not quite as expected as some other accessory items, as much as maybe a shed or a porch or something like that. That being said, there have been some ZBA cases related to pools in the past, not necessarily in this area that I found, but there have been pool variances granted. That kind of sheds a different light on whether there's been a right to pools in the same zoning district and in the vicinity. There's the no detriment criterion, and this is where I think you get a lot of good feedback from the neighboring property owners. You get some input onto whether this will potentially bother or not bother the neighbors. And I think when neighbors are speaking to things like that, they're talking about the visibility of something like this, what it looks like aesthetically from across the street or next door, how loud is it, what kind of light is it shedding, and just consider that for this specific site, you may not have much of an issue. I get the sense these are good neighbors and there may be good screening and a high-quality material around this pool, but just think about what the impact of this type of variance is to the zoning ordinance, which limits having accessory items in a front yard, really for good reason, which is to shield neighboring properties and properties across the street from some of the activities you get in an accessory use. What this might look like if it's replicated is something like you have on the screen here. Very broadly speaking, this is not completely accurately scaled. This is just a cartoon done on Word, so it's not 100% accurate. But this gives you an idea of, just remember that the concept of duplicating a variance that gets granted. And then again, and this slide's a little out of date because now you have 5 letters. 3 are in support from neighbors, 2 are with some concerns from neighbors, including one neighbor next door, concerns about sort of the visual impact, property value, to kind of speak to that no detriment criterion. The not a general problem criterion, this one is always the most difficult to explain, but what this one is saying is, should we take a time out? Is this really something that our zoning ordinance really needs to catch up on? We have probably a lot of requests that are going to come through like this, or maybe a lot of requests that have been coming through under the rug over the years that really should be addressed as a zoning ordinance amendment to resolve this issue rather than for individuals to keep coming in for variance requests. There's sort of a decision tree that goes with that. Does our department have a lot of requests like this? If the answer is no, well, is it apparent there are many instances of unregulated violations like this? And then depending on your answer there, would a general ordinance update be more appropriate to catch this general problem? And if so, that's the way this should be shuffled through. This should go through our ordinance committee and be more of an ordinance update, perhaps to allow pools in corner lots a little bit into the front yard. That's something that should probably be considered regardless of the outcome of the case tonight. We should probably consider taking these issues related to corner lots and accessory structures, fences, where you do have limitations on that second front yard. Maybe it's appropriate in some cases to allow some leniency, but that's something that would really be better suited to be taken up by the ordinance committee. So in this case, you can just talk about what's being presented to you tonight. My recommendation, I do think there's a hurdle to jump over here with no detriment. I think there's not a strong enough case that there would be no detriment by having this in the front yard. So I encourage you to talk through that one and see if you agree with that or not. The preservation of rights and not a general problem, again, with preservation of rights, is this a right that's commonly expected in this zoning district and in the vicinity? And if so, you can probably check the box on that. If it's a general problem that needs an ordinance update, we should probably defer this to allow that process to go forward. But if it's really a unique request, then you can say, okay, we can just act on this one. So those are some decision points you have. If any of these criterion are not met, denial would be appropriate. If they are met, I think conditions would be reasonable here. And I apologize. Again, some of this stuff is what we would require anyway, but it bears having on the record. Make sure that the fencing ordinance requirements are met. And I say that because every pool needs perimeter fencing for a security purpose. But then again, we have the aesthetic protections against certain kinds of fencing in the front yard. So let's make sure they're installing fencing that's right at that 4-foot level and see-through rather than privacy fencing. And that's related to our fence rules. But in doing that, you might require that there's some kind of screening or landscaping to help to shield that a little bit more. Building code requirements for pools must be met. 10-foot separation from the dwelling and 5-foot separation from the lot line. I do think there should be a more descriptive drawing on a survey for where the pool ends up, as long as it's within that 10 feet or 12 feet front yard setback mark. And I think that's all the conditions I would ask you to place on this if you approve, but that's a big if. So I would encourage you to hear from the applicant. I understand she has some pictures of some alternates that she's considered, and she might have some other things to say, and there's also a public hearing, so go ahead and initiate that.
Okay, thank you, Dan. Okay, can I get a motion to open the hearing?
I'll make a motion to open the hearing.
Motion by Scott? Pat, I'm sorry.
So I'll support that.
Supported by Scott. Okay, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Okay, meeting's open. Okay, is there anything the applicant would like to add to what we've already?
Is there a way that we can go back to a couple of those slides first before we show anything there? I'd like to go back to the one, so you can see the aerial view, we can see the sloping, the natural slope, et cetera. Go back to the one where it shows 2 down, please, or 3 down, the one with the neighborhoods. No, sorry, one more. Yeah, there, so it was noted, and I agree with that. We have 15 out of 49 lots in our subdivision, which is, I believe, a little bit older than the Sunset Hills subdivision. And kind of doing a drive-through of neighborhoods, it appears as more of the Sunset Hills is the lots are not as sloping, so they don't run into this issue quite as much. Hence the reason we're applying for a variance, or one of the reasons. My other question would be, as time goes on, would you receive more variances if necessary for a newer development? If you take out the lots in our development along the back there that are completely wooded, absolutely zero possibility because of slope and natural areas to put a pool, that puts it at about 1/3 or right around just over of people having pools. So just to note that it is kind of a pretty prominent thing in our neighborhood. It's not completely uncommon with the exception of how our lot goes. And then going down one more, if you can. And I appreciate all the work that Dan has done to help me understand the zoning regulations, just seeing confusion of other pools sticking out of side yards and understanding the fact that on a corner lot it's 2 front yards versus side. However, my concern with the 2 examples is that I do not feel that they are extremely similar to our case, because neither one of those 2 pools are in the backyard at all, and what we're asking for, it leaves the majority of our in-ground pool in our backyard where it's supposed to be. We're asking to stick out just a bit. The pool, I've had the pool guy out there numerous times. He brought his installer out and has assured me that it would be 8.5 foot. We went with a little bit extra just to err on the side of caution, as I would rather do that than have to come back and say, oops, I goofed. You know, I'm trying to do the homework in order to do it. So I really don't feel, because if you notice, those other 2 examples are completely with the entire pool on their side yard, leaving nothing in the rear. So I feel like the majority of our pool is definitely going to stay in our backyard. So aside from that, I guess I'm aware of the concerns from the people closest to us, and I hear them. I do, and in conversation with him myself, I think, and noted in the email, is fencing, because he said, well, you can do like privacy fencing, correct? And I said, well, we could, but the zoning regulations don't allow that into a front yard. And I feel like he used the word unsightly. However, I feel like it would be more unsightly if I used 2 different types of fencing. And at the end of the day, the pool can go in the backyard. We would have to have a wall. But unfortunately, and you can put up, if you want, Dan, one of the, or I can just use this right here. If you can see where what we're asking for to extend 8.5 feet out, if you look there, the pool is actually starting, so that's their side, that's their garage right there. The pool actually would start at their garage and go this way, and then stick out into, I guess, our second front yard. Whereas if we put the pool in our backyard and do the wall, like we can, it's actually going to be viewable from more of their living space. They're going to look out their kitchen window, they're going to see our pool. But that route stays within all of Walker's zoning regulations. So it's kind of like, we can do this. I was trying to, when I came up with an alternate plan, applied for the variance, definitely be considerate of the neighbors around. I'm not asking to stick out 20 feet into our side yard or second front yard or anything like that. And then we will put, obviously, appropriate fencing. Dan had mentioned something about some kind of shading fencing. It will all match. It will look like a nice in-ground pool. I feel like, no offense if anybody has an above-ground pool, but I feel like in our neighborhood you can say value. However, it is close to the property line, but it's still within what Walker says it needs to be if we have to go to Plan B if it's denied. So Personally, I kind of think our Plan A would better suit them, the ones that had, or the one that I know of that had concerns. However, you know, I guess I can't comment on their behalf because they're not here. They wrote the letter, and I guess just addressing those concerns in a fair way from our perspective on that. Property value, I mean, the point is there can be a pool there, you know. You want a wall and a pool to look out to, or which will stay, and I don't mean to sound negative about that, or we can go out a little bit and it's not viewed as much from that one that had combined. And I'm not sure, I can't address the other one because I'm not aware of it. So we also have another neighbor from our neighborhood who is here in support and is okay with it and doesn't feel that it will be an issue or have any concerns about it as well. So.
Yes, we do. If you're done.
I think, I mean, I am. Do you guys have any further questions
We
about
will, but
anything?
we'd like to hear from her
Sure.
as well. So.
Okay.
Okay. If you'd state your name and address, please.
Hi, my name is Jeanette Williamson, and I reside at 4078 Bulrush Drive Northwest. My husband and I, we moved in 2 years ago, almost to the date. We have 2 young kids, well, 3 now, actually a 2-month-old. And we moved into the neighborhood primarily because we wanted a community-based type neighborhood. I have become really close with the Imhoffs. We have kids similar in age. They go to school together. And I have learned a lot about our neighborhood and our dynamics. And what I've learned about our neighborhood is that it's shifting. A lot of empty nesters are tending to move out, and a lot of families are moving in. We just had another young family move in across the street, 2 doors down from her, actually, with 2 young boys. And I look forward to our children growing up. It's a really great community. Growing up together, and the Imhoffs are phenomenal at community-based type relationships. She's actually a kindergarten teacher. I don't know if you know that. I was a teacher myself, so we have a lot in common, but she throws together these parties, these community parties. She invites everybody. Back to school celebration, Thanksgiving, Easter, Christmas. I mean, I don't know how she has enough time to do it, but she really does take the time to care about her neighbors and respect her neighbors' wishes, and she's very tastefully doing so and considering. And she is phenomenal at, you know, just communicating that to everybody else. And one thing I want to say is that where the pool would be, where it sticks out a little bit, the way that the cul-de-sac turns, it really, from what I see from the drawings and from what she's proposed, I don't see much of a hindrance from the view because of the angle the road comes in at that particular drive. You can't quite see it on any of the pictures here that I've seen that Dan has presented, but it really doesn't hinder much of that house from that person who I understand had wrote the letter of that concern. But I just wanted to share that with you guys and let you know that myself and multiple other neighbors I have spoken with that may not have written a letter and gone out of their way to come out here tonight also feel similar to me about this circumstance. So I appreciate you hearing me, and thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak to this? Hearing none, I'm going to open up to the board for questions. Okay, you might want to step to the microphone if you... So the pool's going to be, is it 8.5, is that the total, or is it just the pool, or is that with the cement and everything? I mean, is there a decking that goes beyond that, or is it just the pool that's going to be the 8.5?
The water's edge.
The water's edge would be 8.5 foot.
Okay, so then there'd be more of the concrete and stuff.
Where that would come into play more for, that would go into the like up to 12-foot kind of a thing. But as far as I'm aware and communicating with Dan, there's no zoning regulations as far as how far concrete can stick out, whether there's a pool or no pool, so.
Okay.
I could jump in. Yeah, that's true. We don't have this question come up, and it's not really answered in the zoning. Accessory buildings have requirements to be behind that front yard plane, but you can have paved surfaces out in the front yard, and so I'd interpret that the pool definition really starts where the open water is, and that's what's got to be in the rear yard.
So the privacy fence then would be beyond that concrete and around it. So you're talking more than the 8.5 foot with a fence. I mean, by the time you're done with,
Yeah, and
Okay.
zoning allows for, remember, a transparent fence in the front yard, so they'd have to use a transparent fence or
Okay.
request a different variance if they're using privacy fence.
okay.
What's the minimum height of the fence around a pool? Is that
4 feet, and
4
that's
feet?
also the maximum. It's got to be exactly 4 feet, because the barrier,
And
what
that's,
was it, 42 for?
it's
safety?
42, it's 42 in the front yard, isn't it?
The maximum height of a fence in front yard is 48.
It's 48.
Yep, but the barrier requirement for a pool is 42.
Is 42.
So there you go, you have 6 inches of wiggle room for
Okay.
So this setback thing, is this 35-foot front yard setback on this corner lot, right? And so is that the issue, that we're in front of they have a 42 point something setback right now in that side yard, right? From the house, so the plane of the house, I mean, how does that plane into this? Does that plane into that?
Where, let's see what you're getting that number from. So
I got a survey here that says 42.7 feet from the front corner of the house to the property line.
Your
So-
yard is defined by the plane of the house, though,
Okay,
not by
that's-
the setback.
Okay, that's my question. So I just want to clarify that in my mind. So I guess, so what we're saying is they have to be behind that plane of that house with that pool's edge. Now, the water's edge, is that correct?
Water's
Not
edge, yes.
concrete, not fence, not grass, just
Correct.
just that. And that's just because the builder, when he did that, he just decided he wanted to squeeze it all the way over to the west, I take it, for some reason.
I'm wondering if, I don't know if I can comment, but we were looking at, previously adding a third stall garage, and we were told that our house sits just far enough back, we couldn't extend it. So I think with the interesting way that lot is set up, that was probably the best placement for the house at that time, just considering on a whole, the lot. Unfortunately, the backyard just has a huge natural.
So I guess my comment is that technically if that house was at 35 foot, we're not talking a whole lot of difference. Where they want to put this pool's edge anyway from a 35-foot front yard setback. Just a comment. There again, that property line kind of moves around as we work our way up the right side. So I don't know exactly, I just kind of sketched a line here based on some stuff, so.
Good comments. It is based on the front plane of the house.
Okay. So then so that's what they're asking, to go 8 feet in front of the plane of the house with the water's edge. I got that right in my mind?
He said
8.5.
8.5 feet, okay. Because if they were at 35 feet, they'd be asking for about a foot in round numbers.
We won't know unless we get it on an exact survey. My scaling looks a little different from theirs, but yeah, anywhere between 1 foot and 3 or 4 feet, if they were at that 35-foot setback.
I guess the second note, kind of off the setback thing, is, when I visited the site, the individual to the north is going to be impacted tremendously by this. I think that's really, we have to consider that as sincerely as we can, I guess, because I envision coming home every day in the summer and he's going to be like driving right into the pool. And then maybe the pool deck area. I don't know if that's bad or not, but I guess that's my observation when I walked over there.
You'd stated that this was kind of your plan A. You had several different
To avoid the-
possibilities.
Yep.
Did you have another plan that included pushing the pool back?
Yep, it will fit. We will have to do the wall. So in reference to your comment about them coming home, I guess to come back at that, I would say they're going to see it more if we put it completely behind the house. I mean, their garage sits the side, but their deck and their kitchen window would view it more. I mean, if we do Plan B. Plan A, I was thinking, oh, it's enough to where it's just along their garage.
Well, I think this lot makes it so difficult because you not only have a corner lot,
Right.
but you have a corner lot going into a cul-de-sac.
Right.
So if you weren't on a cul-de-sac, we wouldn't even be talking about the neighbor probably to the north of you. But because you have this unique lot in a corner with a cul-de-sac, a lot of them other pools in the areas don't have that. So. But we still want to be sensitive.
Sure. Well, and that's kind of why we were trying to kind of find that middle ground. Like, we're open to suggestions. We would prefer to avoid the hill, not put it more in front of their viewing for those reasons. And like I said, I had a friendly conversation with them. They're great people. And I think his biggest concern, which he noted too, was the fencing, because zoning regulations don't allow that privacy fencing. And I really don't want to do two types of fence. I mean, that kind of seems...
Is this the Steve and Linda Bryant?
I'm sorry, the what?
Steve and Linda Bryant, is that the one we're talking about? No?
No,
No, Jim Heitzman?
Heitzman is directly behind.
Heitzman, okay.
Dan, do we know what the size of those pools are in that vicinity?
I didn't get data on the size. The only thing that I will add is that there's a limit on the total combined building footprint and accessory structure area that this Walker zoning ordinance has, but we've never, in my experience, come up on that limit, even for small lots in Chesterfield Heights. The limit is that you can't have more than 35% of your lot area covered by a combination of house and accessory buildings, and this is not even close to that number.
Does that include decks and pools or the pool deck and?
Building floor area and accessory structure, so I would count the pool, maybe not the pool deck.
I mean, because even some of the aerials we looked at before, some of those pools looked like they had 10, 12 feet of concrete around them.
Yeah. Yeah, I did not get good data on the size of the other pools in the area. Maybe the applicants know what some of the common sizes are.
And what would they be looking at if they went with a 16 by 24 pool? You wouldn't be 8 feet or more out in the front yard.
Good question.
And could you shift it back to behind the house another 2 or 3 feet without having to go to the retaining wall? I mean, are those the options? And even moving it back, you're worried about the visibility of the neighbor behind you. He has the right to put up a privacy fence from the front of his garage back if you don't want to look at it.
Right. And with all due respect, if we're going to spend $50,000 on a pool, I would prefer to do more of an average size pool with 3 children growing up. It's going to, a 24-foot, we would just go to Plan B if that were the case, and that's putting it back there. They have the right to put up a privacy fence, like you said, so. 16 by 32 is the second up standard size. I mean, it's not a huge pool by any means. 14 by 28 is the first smallest standard size pool. So I don't feel like we're asking to put in this ginormous L-shaped in-ground pool, but.
Okay. Anything else?
Does this aerial photograph show where that place that actually is? It looked more like it was centered in the yard. Is that the same location?
No, I think this aerial is older than
Older?
the playset.
So that place that has been moved?
This photo that you're looking at right here,
The bottom one.
Yeah. I think
that's the current one, because that's my car in the driveway, so that's not an old photo. That's the place that is,
They're current.
yeah.
Okay, but the playset is.
When you're
a year
looking,
now,
The playset hasn't moved
Looks
since
different when you're looking at the playset, you know, in actuality, as opposed to looking at down on it.
I think
That
there's
one.
been a picture.
See, that looks more like it's between the two, more centralized.
You wanna see today's picture? Here's one. If it helps you, Rod, you can look at it.
Brand new picture back.
I'm just wondering too, because you got that hill there where the playset is sitting on, some of that could be dug out anyway. I mean, that's almost on the high part, on the high side,
I think I would be.
because you're gonna have to dig some of that out anyway to get the pool in.
With the Plan A, with the variance being approved, we would avoid the retaining wall altogether. That would be avoided, and that he had the installer come out and has assured me that that would be. If we go back farther and place it within all zoning, don't need a variance, it fits, it's fine. We need the wall, which then, it's not just the pool that's in view, it's now a retaining wall, but those are all okay things to have in your own personal yard that don't require a variance. And the other piece of it is we have 3 young children that I would kind of see it as a broken life type thing, but I mean, that's kind of a side thing from the pool, but. So, and I will say with that picture, I feel like if you're actually there on the property, that doesn't show the slope complete justice. I mean, it's a pretty decent picture, but there's a decent slope there.
The playset isn't exactly level where it's setting now. It is a slight angle, and it was kind of a pain in the butt when I was putting it together there.
Is it in the front plane of the house or not?
What's that?
Does it break the front plane of the house where it's located now or not?
No.
Are you interested in seeing the diagram of what it would look like if we just do it and stay within all regulations? Because I do have a copy
Sure,
of that
yeah.
too. Dan, you have it up there.
You can come on up and shuffle the papers around, we have camera views. You can probably see if you look at, you gotta look way over there, to see where you're pointing, but.
Oh,
there you go.
gotcha, okay.
Sorry.
So this, I don't know in which direction, this just shows it where the pool is still on an angle, but it's shifted back this way. It doesn't have the wall actually drawn on there, but that's where we would go into that slope and need to have the wall. And this one actually, yeah, that's the front one. So you can just kind of see, whereas initially the one started here, this is all their back garage. Do you have like a highlighter or a pen? Can I just use that real quick? So like, this right here is their garage. This is kitchen, housing, they have a shed here. So it kind of blocks some naturally. This is where, and the picture doesn't do it complete justice, but it's going to start, if you can look at the play set, and go that way, and it would stick out. That's when it would stick out just a little bit. But now if we shift it, it's going to come back. There's another one that shows it better. The wall will still be there. This is parallel with the house. So we have 2 options. We can still angle it and follow the property line, or we can shift it this way. His lines were just a titch off here, but he based it on the survey, taking the measurements off the official survey that we paid to have done last summer.
Okay.
And so basically you can just see that if you have to do the wall and we put it, everything falls within Walker zoning regulations, they are going to see more of it. The wall included, as well as the pool. So our plan A was to have it stick out just a little bit, and it really wouldn't be much, but it would.
You're not on camera.
Oh, hi,
Other
sorry,
way.
sorry.
There you go.
Thank you. But it would not be, I mean, it's gonna be mostly their garage and a little bit of their driveway here that they would view.
And you've had a discussion with your neighbors. What was their take on it? I mean, what?
Well, he approached me on it, which I was kind of surprised that he had heard that we were working with Walker. I don't know how, but he said, so you want to put a pool, huh? And I said, we hope to, and, I kind of explained to him what we were trying to do so we could avoid and everything. And he said, well, you could put up a privacy fence, right? And that's when we got into the conversation of, well, if it sticks out a little bit, it has to be 50% or more see-through, so all in all. But if we have to shift it back, we're gonna have to put money into the wall. We're not going to go with privacy fence because it's not required as
Right.
long as it's in your backyard. So it's just kind of like weighing the options, I guess. So we're trying to be.
So the conversation with him, which did he prefer? I mean, what was his
I
take?
didn't really get a good take.
Okay.
We didn't have like an extensive conversation, and he didn't indicate any major concerns at that point in conversation, but sometimes when you're face to face, it's a little bit more difficult to do as well. So I just, it will be close to the property line, but it's going to be closer doing it the other way, so.
It would have been nice if he was here.
I think he did provide one of his letters.
Yes,
In the letter.
yeah, it just have some questions that,
Available. It's hard to
Yeah.
get everybody's schedules synchronized.
okay.
So the retaining wall is gonna be at the west end of this pool, correct?
Correct.
Did you do any discussions about moving that pool down into that lower area, where you currently have that retaining wall at the daylight level? Did the pool
There-
guy ever?
Would need to be probably an even higher retaining wall, just because of the slope, and there's not enough room to like put the whole thing.
Okay.
I guess that makes sense. Dan, you were out there, maybe you can,
The backyard slopes at a
Yeah,
weird
so-
angle.
yeah, yeah,
It comes in both ways,
Right.
downhill, and
To
then
that
goes
corner,
down,
right. Yeah.
So at the bottom of the hill, I don't even know if it would be possible.
and my understanding was that the majority of it needs to be in the rear,
So-
correct?
so
It
you-
can stick out
you-
into the plane. but
So
the majority-
if you leave it here, you don't need any retaining wall?
Correct.
If we leave it with the variance approved, we don't need any retaining wall, and it's shifted where it pretty much starts at their, water's edge starts at their garage,
Yeah.
and will extend just a little bit out.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
If I can
Yep.
just try to jump in and say a couple things. I think a lot of the conversation here is about the view from the neighboring property and different interpretations of what's bad or good about that, depending on the different layouts that are proposed. Just remember that all ties back to that no detriment criterion. So it sounds like the main question you're trying to have answered is the default option or the variance option less visually obtrusive than the zoning compliant option to perhaps the majority of neighbors, or especially the neighbors next door? Making a case that they think it will be less visually obtrusive to the neighbor next door to have it in a variance location. I think that was what that whole conversation boiled down into.
Can we put in the conditional approval, like, specific landscaping that they'd have to use instead of using a privacy fence to then limit the view that the neighbor would have then, if it were to go into the front yard area?
Yep, there are no limits on landscaping, so hedge landscaping is fair game, even though privacy fences are not. Kind of look at that as a loophole, but that's something that we don't regulate in our zoning ordinance. Privacy fencing is a specific definition that we don't allow, but we do allow landscaping in the front yard. It also sounds like there are some questions, and I hate to drag things out any longer, but there are some questions about kind of how this plan looks and how the property looks and the severity of the slope. If there's need to get more data on that or more imagery or maybe take another site visit, you can always table and make a decision later. I hate to say that, nobody likes to have a case tabled, but this might be one of those things where you have more data, specific data that you want to collect before you make a decision, or you might not. Maybe take a straw poll and see if you have enough to go off of. If the majority of you think you do, then I would vote tonight.
So if it's in the backyard, they don't have any of the fencing or bushes or anything, I mean, they don't have to worry about any of that, correct?
The fence would still be required by the
The-
building code. It just wouldn't be required that it's privacy.
Okay,
Yeah, they could do privacy in the backyard. It wouldn't be barred from any type of privacy fence if it's behind every plane of the home.
Correct, but if we put it completely in the backyard, we're going to have to invest in the wall, therefore, we're not doing privacy fencing because it's not required.
right.
Which was, I kind of think, opposite to the no detriment.
So it boils down to the wall, basically. I mean, so it's able to be moved to the back,
Mhm.
but we're not doing it just because of the wall? Really, is that where we're,
Well, and he was concerned about view, and we
Right.
felt like, out of all due respect for the person closest to us, we wouldn't put it outside, directly outside
Right.
of livable space windows. I mean, you don't live in your garage, really. They have blinds that are closed all the time on that window that's on the garage.
well, in
so-
his letter, he doesn't specify if it's the location, or he's just saying he just doesn't want the pool, where he can see it at all. I mean, that seems to be, his letter isn't
I
really
think it's because the
specific.
lot is smaller, it would be closer to the property line.
Mm-hmm.
But either way, Plan A, Plan B, or Plan C, it's still going to be within Walker's zoning regulations. So there really is no, basically, you can't tell us we can't.
Right,
You know,
exactly. Well, I'm just trying to figure out what because,
Sure.
if we can go back and if it's him with his view, I don't know if that's really, it's more of the detriment part, I guess, but,
And I guess, like you said, I mean, they can choose to put up a privacy fence as
Yeah,
well. I mean,
exactly.
I don't know.
Okay. Does anyone have anything else before we close the meeting? No? Tom? Roger?
I like Plan B.
A straw poll?
Close the meeting.
Hmm?
Close the meeting.
Motion to close the meeting?
I'll make a motion to close the meeting.
Okay.
I'll second that.
Second by Roger. All in favor?
Did you make a motion?
Close the meeting.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Close the public meeting.
Yep.
Not hearing it, so.
Seconded by Roger, or Randy.
The other Roger.
Yeah, I was looking at Roger. All in favor? Closing the meeting? Aye. All opposed? Meeting's closed. Entertain a motion, or what,
Maybe first question, do you have enough information? So, yes, no, straw poll? And then you can get into what.
Can this is a tough one. I like the pool, like Roger said, option B. And when you look at it, to me, that fits, it works, it's a good thing. But the tough part is, this lot is unique. It has some pretty favorable reasons for us to grant a variance based on the corner lot, the topography and all that stuff. So this one's kind of a tough nut for me to just kind of, I don't know.
but normally those are where you don't really have an option B, where those fall into, where this, there is a second option.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good.
I mean, that's helpful, because that's why I'm kind of torn what to do here.
I think the lot on its own, just taking the plan and it all, that's a pretty easy, for me, a fairly easy sell. It's complicated by the cul-de-sac, which makes the rear neighbor in a really funky spot, which changes things a lot, I think. So it's not just a corner lot sort of situation.
and they've admitted, they've looked at that as an option. It's an acknowledgement on their part that they truly don't have exceptional or extraordinary circumstances. It's nice, it's probably preferable, but it's not the only thing they have.
Okay.
So it misses on the first criteria alone.
Scott, any thoughts?
Yeah, I tend to agree with folks that have said Plan B is an option, and we have to also consider that on the no detriment, it's not just a consideration of this immediate neighbor, this is for the entire neighborhood, and that has to be taken into consideration as well. There's neighbors maybe across the street or who have other vantage points who we may or may not have what their point of view is, but we have to, take a wide-ranging approach to this.
Okay.
Well, you also have to take into consideration the other neighbors, like she said, with the other two examples that we gave, they didn't match her example. But if you grant this one, then what keeps those from coming back saying, okay, they get theirs in the front yard, we get ours in the front yard? Do you open a can of worms? I mean, it's not like they can't put the pool further back.
That's what's kind of unique, because normally we don't have that option.
But this is similar to what we've run in before with other accessories. When our planning commission goes through and approves these plat layouts, don't look at the draining easements, don't look at the size of the shapes of the lots. Where could you put a shed? Where can you put a pool? Can I use only a quarter of my backyard because I have a drainage easement back there? But to me, I mean, the only restriction here is by not putting it in the backyard, which Plan B did. I guess I would rather see it parallel to the property line than parallel to the house. But they're concerned about the neighbor's view. He's going to be concerned either way.
That's why I was thinking with his letter, he wasn't real specific on what it was that bothered him,
It's just if he doesn't like the view further back toward his backyard, he can put up a privacy fence. If the pool is hanging out in their secondary front yard, it's in his front yard. He has no recourse. He can't put up a privacy fence in front of his garage.
That's true.
But no matter what, the pool deck is gonna stick out in that front yard anyway. That's where the activity's gonna be, I think. I mean, probably when we're not in the pool, so there's gonna be stuff in that front yard anyhow. Whether it's behind the house or the plane of the house or in front of that plane of the house. I don't know, I still see there's a lot of difficulties there with that corner lot, cul-de-sac and setbacks, but outside their control.
Okay, anyone care to make a motion? Yep.
Throw something out there, you can also take a pulse and do like kind of a straw poll. It's advisable to make a motion based on an affirmative statement on what the majority opinion is. So it's either a motion to approve or deny, not a failed motion to approve. So, or a failed motion to deny. Make sure the majority is making the statement. So maybe a straw poll is a good way to figure that out.
Okay. Alrighty, well, who would be in favor of granting the variance?
Do I have to raise my hand?
Yes, you do.
I do. Okay.
Tom? Leah? No. Just Randy.
Pretty special.
So,
Randy's in favor of what?
granting the variance.
Granting the variance.
So then based on that,
If I were to make a motion to approve it, I would state that it has to be within 35-foot front yard setback. That would be what I would, if I was gonna make a motion, that's what I would say. But
You mean if it were within the buildable
Correct.
lot area?
Correct. If the water's edge was at the 35-foot setback, that's the condition I would put.
okay. What'd you say there, Roger?
I can make a motion if you want me to.
Anyone
Or
care?
did you want to continue with a straw poll, or are we done with a straw poll thing?
I still recommend the straw poll if not everybody else is, or has everybody voted?
Well, just Randy was
Okay.
for the variance, so.
Randy's the only one that voted to grant the variance.
Okay.
So,
If you don't have a good idea of who would go which way, I'd still recommend that, just so you make a motion based on the majority opinion. You don't want to have a.
Okay, I didn't because there's,
You don't have a
okay,
negative?
okay, so who would be against?
I guess I would make a motion to deny the variance based on the fact that although this is somewhat exceptional, they still have an alternative. And I don't think that they have met the no detriment clause.
Okay, motion by Roger,
I'll support that.
support by Pat. Anything, Dan? You look, no, okay,
You did support it.
okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed?
all right,
Your variance has been denied. So, just need a signature up here with Roger.
Now, who's gonna contact the neighbors behind us when the pool goes in?
Yeah,
I'll continue, I'll work with you folks to
Sure. Yep.
the layout works.
Thank you.
all set, Dan?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, next up is 676 Gage Street Northwest. Applicant Dan Larabelle, on behalf of owner Westview Capital LLC, has applied seeking to construct a plus or minus 1,736-foot single-family home on a lot zoned SA, suburban single-family residential, with an area of plus or minus 10,088 square feet, and with a width of plus or minus 108 square feet, which is not connected to public water or public sanitary sewer utilities, contrary to section 94-169 F1 of the Walker zoning ordinance, which prohibits the building on SA zone lot which does not meet minimum width of 125 feet or an area of 25,000 square feet, dimensional requirements of the S suburban zone district where public water is not available. The subject lot is 676 Gage Street Northwest. Applicant has provided written responses for the dimensional variance criteria as follows. Exceptional or extraordinary circumstances. The Greenview number 2 plat was created in 1960. Since that time, the zoning ordinance has been modified to include provisions related to the public water and sewer supply that are not feasible to achieve for this parcel. There is no public water or public sewer available for this property, and it is not feasible or prudent to extend the water main to this parcel. There has been no modification to the parcel boundary since it was created, and it is not possible to increase the size of the parcel. The extraordinary circumstances identified as a modification to the zoning ordinance after the Greenview number 2 plat was created. Preservation of rights. This variance request is seeking relief from a hardship created by zoning ordinance modification, and such approval would preserve the property right to construct a single-family home. Requests of similar nature have been approved in the past for homes at 685 and 698 Gage Street Northwest. Our request has a parallel hardship. These sites and our parcel are suitable for an on-site water supply and sewage disposal, and the single-family use is permitted within the zoning district and neighborhood. No detriment. Authorizing the requested variance will relieve a hardship created by the zoning ordinance and will not be of any detriment to the adjacent property owners or public interest. The proposed use of the single-family home is intended in the 1960s platting of the Greenview number 2 and will be served with an on-site water supply and sewage disposal consistent with the homes on Gage Street. Authorizing this request will not impair the intent or purpose of the chapter because of the consistency of the land use. Additional consideration may be given to the soft characteristics of the language contained in section 94-169F1 in lieu of a firm command. Upon careful reading of this provision, the command may, in lieu of, or shall is used in the context of the properly may be used. This soft language should provide the Zoning Board of Appeals additional precedent to and authority to authorize the requested variance. In summary, authorizing this variance will provide an opportunity for the ZBA to exercise its authority to relieve an unintended burdens created by modifications to the zoning ordinance without burdening adjacent property owners or the city. Not a general problem. The requested variance is not of a general or recurrent nature because the proposed home would occupy the last vacant site in Greenview number 2 plat. Furthermore, the quantity of vacant lots in the city's SA zoning district without public water or water services are assumed to be very limited or non-existent after the construction of the proposed home. Says we also have letters from neighbors, property owners that will be added to the record. Okay. Dan, is there anything you'd like to add?
There might have been a copy-paste error because I don't think I actually got anything written from the neighbors for this one.
Okay,
so
yeah, I didn't see anything when I was
apologize.
going through it either, but.
Okay, so I appreciate everybody's patience here. By the way, if anybody was in here for a previous case, you guys don't have to stick around, although it's, I'm sure, an enthralling learning experience for you. But we're moving on to our last case here, and I appreciate the patience. We're back into unusual territory because we're not dealing, again, with what I consider a more conventional variance request. We're dealing with an issue on kind of layers of history and layers of kind of the development growth of the city of Walker. So we're stepping way back to understand what this site is all about. Here's the context. You are standing on a drone somewhere east of Alpine Avenue, south of 4 Mile Road. We're actually looking south here Here's Kingsbury Street, here's Gage Street. I oriented this upside down with south being at the top because that's the way the plan was laid out, which makes sense for how they had to label everything on their plan. But again, we're looking south here with south at the top. This is the layout of their proposed house, I believe a bi-level style house. The builder is here, who's also the applicant, to speak about this layout. I'll jump right into, maybe I should step back and explain why this is a variance request, and then we'll jump into the criteria. There is a rule specific to this zoning district in Walker that's not like rules in any other zoning district, except there's some similar language in our ag zoning district, but not quite as difficult is what it states for SA zoning. In SA zoning, that zoning district was set up with the intent of allowing development with one public utility or another is how it reads in the intent of that zoning district. The actual language of the requirement that's relevant to this case is that if you have public water and public sewer, you can go to a dimension that's consistent with a higher density single-family residential, which is the A zoning district. That's a 90-foot wide lot, quarter-acre size. If you have public water but no public sewer, you can do that as well. But if you have no public water, then you have to uptick your development style to the S zoning, which is a lower density zoning with half-acre lot minimums, roughly 25,000 square feet, and 125 feet of frontage. So you either need to connect to public water or you need to build on a lot that's larger, and you can't build on a lot that doesn't have public water if you're smaller. So therein lies the problem where you have lawful non-conforming platted lots that were platted prior to the passage of that zoning ordinance, and then the zoning came in and said you cannot build on a lot without public water. So this is an issue that does not come up very often, but we have had some inquiries this year about this site and a couple of other sites in Walker, and we're kind of responding to the other inquiries. But other than that, I have not seen this question come up other than this site. In getting into the history, you can see that this actually came up in this subdivision back in 1987, a whole generation ago. So there's a variance request for two of the lots near this property that I'll show you, responding to the same issue. It's building on a pre-platted lot without public water. The lot is too small for the current zoning to build without public water. So that's where we are. We're stuck with what I'm calling a zoning administrative denial to build there based on that rule that's in our zoning ordinance. That being said, there are parallel rules that are administered by the Kent County Health Department that say when it's safe to build a septic or well system. There are rules that are administered by the City of Grand Rapids Engineering Department that say when it's safe to not require a connection to public water. Both of those checkboxes have been met for this site, where Grand Rapids and the Health Department have said, you know what, it's okay, you're far enough from public water that you don't have to connect, and the soils are conducive to well and septic being installed, so you don't have to connect on those fronts. So what we're left with here is the zoning still says you can't build, and for that reason I've had to turn people away. Past building officials, it sounds like, have turned people away, and zoning administrators when they've asked about building on this lot, just based on that rule that you're considering tonight, that 94-169 in our zoning ordinance. So that's where we sit. So that being said, it doesn't fall neatly within the box for a dimensional variance because you're not looking at putting a structure or a use in a part of a lot that it shouldn't go in. It's really about the entire lot as a whole and its relation to utilities. So I'll try to walk you through it as best I can, and we can try to frame this up based on those criteria, but it's going to come down to some kind of specific findings for this case. The first one, exceptional or extraordinary circumstances, I would kind of agree with some of the things the applicant was saying. This is a pre-platted lot, so that in and of itself is sort of exceptional. It is a lot that's within the size and scale of a lot of the lots in this neighborhood. Here are some examples of other lots under the same zoning. It's on the small side for sure within lots in this zone district. This isn't really that relevant for this case, other than just showing you where it lies in the area of some other lots that are in the vicinity, and a lot of these have been built without public water or public sewer. In my opinion, the main exceptional or extraordinary thing about this lot is that it was part of a previously approved development plan in 1960 that got overridden by more current zoning.
Do we know why this lot was never developed?
At the very beginning, I don't know why it wasn't picked up right away, and I think in recent years it's been denied based on some of these administrative denials based on what's in the zoning.
I thought maybe it was owned by the property next door and they're trying to now sell it, or?
Not to my knowledge. I think
Or has this lot always been for sale?
I don't know what if it was ever owned by the neighboring property owner and sold off, but I don't think it was ever. Well, I don't know. I don't know if it was ever combined with an adjacent lot and then redivided or anything like that. As far as I know, since I've been in Walker, when this has come up, it's been a standalone lot that just hasn't been built on. So there's a chance it may have been part of another property or owned by a neighbor previously, but it's
I mean, based on the
standalone.
map, it looks like it was there when they platted this subdivision out.
Yeah. Mhm. It's a good question. The second thing we look at is preservation of rights. There's pretty strong evidence that properties in this zoning district in the vicinity have had the right to build without public water. That's kind of taken the bare bones approach to this criterion. I just point out on this map that everything in that kind of more bold yellow is lots that I don't think have a public water connection, just based on the utility pattern. Grand Rapids Water District is where the blue line is. That's water mains from the Grand Rapids system. The North Kent system or the Plainfield system is farther north, and there may be a lot or two to the north within Walker's limits that are served by Plainfield. But most of those bold lots in the yellow do not have public water. And then I will point out that 640 Gage Street appears to be smaller than this lot, and it also was built without public water. So that's just some examples of lots that have been constructed without public water. Now, it bears mentioning that a couple of these lots were pre-platted like this one and then approved after the passage of the ordinance by way of a variance, just like you're considering tonight. So there's minutes from the records of approval from the 1987 case. It's actually, I believe, this wedge-shaped lot here and then the one to the north of it. Those lots are a little larger. They have a little less frontage around the curve, but they're actually a little bit larger. But very similar idea that they were proposed for building after the passage of that ordinance that said you can't build on a lot under a certain area without public water. But then you get to this criterion, and I think this is kind of the linchpin of the whole thing, which is what's the real intent of this zoning ordinance? In my opinion, it's not to require a lower density of development. It's to require a lower density of development only if the conditions aren't suitable for drinking water. And there are other agencies that have a better idea, in my opinion, than our community development department of what the conditions are for appropriate drinking water in terms of groundwater and connecting to public water. And to that point, we found out about this process a little later in the process. We were handed a building permit application with an approved well and septic permit right out of the gate. So before I knew about this specific proposal, there had already been a well and septic approval for this site. There had already been some conversation about, from the City of Grand Rapids Engineering Department, about not requiring a connection to public water. So those agencies already looked at this site and came to the determination that this was a suitable site for well and septic. So that's a big check mark for the no detriment criterion. And then at that point, you're just talking about meeting setbacks, meeting building code requirements, which they'll be obligated to do if they do build there. What I think is the last criterion, I think in this case is really important to talk about as well. The outcome of this case is going to be that we need to deal with what I consider to be a general problem, in the sense that there are lots out there that fall in this gray area where you have a pre-platted non-conforming, lawful non-conforming in many cases, lot that's smaller than a certain area. Then a rule came in that said you need public utilities to serve lots of that small size. We need to address that in our zoning, perhaps with language that deals with this previously platted lawful non-conforming lot issue. So whether or not there's action on this request tonight, that should be taken up with our ordinance committee. You might even table to get some more, at least preliminary discussion with the ordinance committee before it comes back to you folks here. But then again, there's a pretty thorough application and an approved layout from the health department based on what's been proposed. So you do have a lot of information about this case if you want to act tonight. But I do think this is something we're going to have to address through our ordinance committee and clean up our zoning language about in the future. So I'd request that you really focus in on that exceptional or extraordinary circumstances item and talk about whether this is a ordinance that should be updated, and then you can make a decision accordingly. One last thing I'll point out is that there are, to my knowledge, the Green Ridge plat to the northeast of this site. Same zoning here, same lack of utilities, this area here, and also in the southwest part of town near the Riverbend and Wilson neighborhood, there's also some SA zoning without adequate utilities provided there, or at least there has been that zoning proposed there. So this is an issue that applies to lots in those areas. So we can find some more data about lots that are like this one if need be, but I think you have a lot to go off of tonight.
Okay. Thank you, Dan. Okay. Can I get a motion to open the hearing? Motion by Scott. Support?
Support.
Support by Tom. All in favor of opening hearing, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, hearing's open. Okay, is the applicant here for 676 Gage? And state your name and...
Yeah, certainly. Good evening. My name is Dan Larabelle. I represent Westview Capital and Allen Edwin Homes on the land development team. I do everything before the foundations go in the ground. So this was a complex site right from the get-go, right when we started looking at it. Given the nature, right when I started, I started digging into the utilities pretty thoroughly. And right, the City of Grand Rapids, the Water Department, and the city engineer, City of Walker engineer, they did not require a connection to the water and sewer because it's not available. There's no frontage on the water and sewer. So the next step is we went to the health department and we obtained the permit. Looking at it from a platted lot, as it's a platted lot, and looking at the current zoning requirements as far as dimensions, right away we flipped to the legal non-conforming lot provisions, seem to meet those requirements. Purchased the lot, and to answer your question, we did purchase it from the neighbor, the existing neighbor. I'm not sure how long he or she owned it. But we did a thorough investigation. We didn't buy it on a whim, and that's through experience. And so, Mr. Power informed us of the additional provision regarding the water and sewer connection requirement. So here we are tonight, and I think I hit you read through my submittal, our response to each of the 4 criteria, but if you don't mind, I'd like to just do a Cliff Notes version on them.
Sure.
The number 1, exceptional circumstance. Given that it is a plat from the 1960s, how all of the lots did not get built upon at this time is, I'm not sure why. But after the platting, the city implemented a provision, the provision we're discussing tonight. It's not feasible to follow that provision right now. The water and sewer was not present when the provision was implemented. It's not present today. There was no lot line adjustments, no shifts. I think that there's evidence to meet the exception and extraordinary circumstances. Number 2, the preservation of rights. It's the similar use as all of the other uses in the community and in the zone. The water and sewer, the permit is approved. It's been issued by the health department. And I think a big one to hit on is that there's 2 semi-recent, call it, the variances from 1987 that approved similar requests or an identical request. Number 3 is no detriment. The site is consistent with the use with respect to the residential lot configuration. Again, the health department has approved it. I think you've heard that now, I imagine. Number 4, not a general problem. This was a tougher question to answer, and this is something that Mr. Power, this is a great question for him, a planner question, right? But I guess from the perspective that, yeah, it's probably you might run into it again, it looks like, but I guess ultimately tabling the decision for an ordinance review or revision and committee, for us that'd be semi-detrimental. It'd be tough to sit on the sidelines during these summer months when it's prime building season. So it appears that's ultimately that's kind of another recommendation, another format is a direction of it would be more of a use by right provision, and really that's kind of what you would see in a lot of other municipalities that we've come across these kind of oddball lots in. So and also there's the section regarding dwellings outside of a mobile home park. We did respond to those, and we're all in compliance with those as well. And of course, if anything else comes up, we'll address that. So I guess considering the circumstance that created the issue, the consistency of the use, the suitability of the site layout, the historical precedents, we're requesting relief from the provision and consideration for approval. Happy to answer any other questions.
Okay. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address this as well? Okay. No.
I got a question. I'm coming into this late.
Okay. Could you state your name for us and the address,
Yes.
please?
My name is Bob Gasso. I live at 651 Kingsbury. The picture you have about the aerial down to the trees, I counted 11 trees there tonight. They vary from 20 foot to 40 foot. There's a good 60 foot there. Any of those trees come down, they're going to hit my house and the other 2. On the top, I live in the 3rd house over. My concern is ripping these trees out, what's that going to do to sand? Because apparently this used to be a golf course at one time. And the sand is moving with all the water we've had. We've had a couple people in the neighborhood that have moved their leach fields to the front of their property. And that size leach field that's going in there, I don't think is going to fit in the front someday. I have regular water, but I have septic. So my concern is what's going to happen if any movement pulling the trees out of there. That's pretty much what I've got.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Has there been any kind of, have they surveyed that or anything? Because all those trees pretty much fill up that whole plot. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I'll turn over to the board and any questions they may have. You might want to come back up to the microphone, but. So, okay, I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around this. Why is there services at that location, water and sewer? I mean,
There's
at
not.
all, there's not. So it's like your only option is to put those in.
Correct.
And our ordinance is nay on that.
I don't know if I put the exact language in there, but the language reads like, well, here it is. Bear with me, I'll skip to the punchline here. If neither public water nor sewer is available, the property may be used in compliance with the area, height, bulk, and placement requirements set forth in the schedule of the district regulations for the S district. And that means if neither public water nor sewer is available, you have to stick with S district standards.
Okay.
25,000 square feet and 125 feet of frontage to build it.
In which this doesn't reach either.
Now, if I were, you can think about this in terms of what's already there or what's proposed, and it's a lot more easy to wrap your head around something that's proposed. If you're proposing to have a development without public water in an SA zone district, that means that you have to make 25,000 square foot lots.
Okay, that's where I was trying to understand this. Okay. So I wonder if that's why it's been vacant all these years.
It seems that there's been a consistent interpretation that this lot is non-buildable until there's public water there, based on that rule.
Okay.
What is it specific about this parcel that is appealing to you to build on it?
It hit a nice price point. Our market's really price point constrained right now. It's still going to be in the 180 to 200,000 range, but that's really hard to hit anywhere across Michigan.
Is there anything specific about the land itself?
It's a good location. The land itself it's a platted lot, so it's a vacant buildable lot, which is also very hard to come across right now. Any vacant buildable lots, very expensive.
I think, and that's, sorry to jump in, I don't want to do that too much, and it's late at night, but I think Board Member Funk, Scott, had a good comment there. I think he's looking at this from a different angle, that you can think about what's exceptional about the property in a positive way, not just in a negative way, that makes for value in the request. I think that you're talking about perhaps that this is an infill site, vacant land in a prime location. We don't often look at variance requests in that light, but what's especially favorable about this lot that means that you really should build there? It's one way to look at that.
Well, the other thing is there's actually public water not too far from here, correct?
Right.
I mean, isn't it just a block away? So I guess in my analysis is if the county had a problem or we did have a water quality issue, I mean, we do have some water main in that neighborhood that I'm sure that the city of Grand Rapids and Kent County would probably do something to make all those water things. So, I mean, the water service is not the well service for me, or a private well would not be a problem. That's my opinion on that water service. I think that all those other folks in there have septic systems, even the ones that do have. What's the name of that street that gentleman lives on? What's your street?
Kingsbury.
Kingsbury. That's where you come in? Okay.
Runs down there, they put in there.
Okay.
A line.
Okay.
Why they didn't go around Gage,
Yeah,
I
it's
have
odd.
no idea.
Right. But you have a septic system, right, on your lot?
I have
Okay.
septic, but I think I might have a problem with that now too.
Sure.
Because of all the rain and the sand.
Right, yeah, we had a lot of rain this year. Okay. But that lot meets the reserve, the drain bed is there in the rear yard, I believe, is that what I saw? And then the reserved lot, or the reserve bed is on the side yard, which means we probably can't put pools in those side yards.
Let's hope not.
I'm just thinking that's a positive. No, or a fence, yeah. So I mean, to me, it makes kind of sense to finish off that development. I think spatially, there's all ranches in that thing. Is that a 60s thing or something, maybe, that plat, maybe? Or you probably don't know from the 60s, but, there's all those long ranches with, separate garages, detached garages, and some of them on the longer lots have attached garages, but, I guess that's why I was more concerned today about the architectural or the footprint of the building, how that was gonna fit on there, so I feel comfortable with the bi-level that you propose. And I feel comfortable with the Kent County, stuff, and, you know, I mean, if someone come in with a plat, Dan, you're not gonna let them do 10,000 square foot lots without public utilities.
Based on our current rules, if you're in SA zoning, you gotta have, or really, if you don't have public water,
They're gonna bring
a
it.
standard or a ag standard, and that's either half an acre or an acre. That's for new development.
Right, and these folks would have to hook up to it. If for some reason in the future the water and sewer came through there, they're gonna have to hook up to it like the rest of the neighbors, correct?
That's a question for City of Grand Rapids. And
I mean,
think
typically
Scott
that's-
With our, operator would answer that better than I could, but I think Andrew had a good point. There may have been an attempt at a special assessment district to get water through there at one point, and it was turned down.
Okay.
Perhaps for sewer, but that's the kind of thing, you want that critical mass to get developed.
Right.
All at once.
Right.
You have to vote with that, there has to be
Right.
2/3 vote.
Right.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
And part of the previous variance approvals, that was a condition of approval. If water were to be extended through Gage Street, a hookup is required. Just wanted to offer that and throw that in there.
Okay. So Dan, if they would come to you without the county stuff and whatnot, and just said, hey, we're gonna buy this, where would we have been without the county's involvement in the city?
Well, I would bring the county into this review either way, because then I
Okay.
think we'd all have an obligation to know if it's even safe and non-detrimental to install well and septic there. So we'd end up with the same result, because I'd make sure the county was part of this review process.
Okay.
Dan, do you know the properties immediately to the north, across the street, and immediately to the east? No, according to this, no water, no sewer. When were those built? It was platted in 1960. Were those homes newer than 1960?
I haven't done a study on the age of construction of those homes. My guess is the only homes that were built after 1972, when this ordinance were passed were those two
In the 80s.
685 and 98 across the street. So most of them have been around for 30 years plus.
You keep talking and give me like 1 minute. We're working on that study right now, and I can tell you.
Okay.
The assessor
Okay,
director-
start the clock.
Do these neighborhoods still have the right to vote whether they want subject water and sewer or either or turn it down?
My understanding is that's how the special assessment district process works. So if there was a special assessment district to extend.
I know where I live, the street behind me, they have sewer, but they don't have water because they couldn't get half the residents to say yes. So, that's not Werner.
Okay,
Marlin has both, Werner only has sewer.
okay, there's another.
And then some of the houses that are on Milo there, the one with the chicken, they still have their own well. They have sewer, they have sewer, they only have to have a well.
Only in Walker.
So that was a 1920s plat, so yeah, some of these are, and that's again where we could probably gather a lot more data about every case where there's this remnant plat, parcel fabric, but the new zoning came in, and if people ask about vacant lots in those areas, we're gonna have to deal with this issue. But, yeah, I think with special assessment, you have the right to vote. It has to get a certain threshold of votes from the neighbors to vote.
Anyway, just put water and sewer in everywhere and forget it.
It's a good master plan question, so that's something we'll deal with on a community-wide level.
We've been dealing with it for at least 25 years since I've been here. Especially in South, like you say, in South Walker, we have the same thing. You know, once you start getting into letting them
which is why water and sewer rates are higher for those in the city who have it. Because I've talked to the people at Grand Rapids, and they this is what it costs for water and sewer in watering water. We divide it among the people who have it. Everybody that doesn't have it doesn't have to pay an assessment on it, or doesn't have to pay a water bill.
I think I've only lived there 20 years, but I think that's what happened with Gage. They wanted like $10,000 or something, split up on the other side. That's just rumor, that's just what I've heard.
According to the map he's got up here, it looks like it's got a blue stub for that street.
Yeah.
And it never went in.
Oh,
Yeah,
really?
yeah, right there.
Well, see, I have to have fresh water, the other wouldn't work at all. But that picture on those trees, I think that's gotta be like 20 years old. Those trees there's a couple in there that are 60 foot. And they're gonna hit one of those 3 houses, and even if it goes over, it'll hit mine. And the day I moved in there is when we had those 20 miles an hour winds come through. I had a 40 foot in front of my house. That was the day I moved in, and that was on my neighbor's car. So I'm kind of concerned about those trees, and not to save them. That isn't what I'm talking about. I'm concerned about what it's going to do to the earth underneath. Because if that starts getting turned over and it's sand, then, the water level on there, I don't know what it is. It said 50 foot on the well. They do.
I think so, 25, but.
Is that what that one picture showed?
Some ordinances too, if you're even in a district like that, your well takes a crap on you. A lot of times they won't let you put a new well in.
Yeah.
Or if you use your primary and your secondary septic system, at some point you gotta hook up.
Yeah, I'm not trying to cut the deal or anything like that. That's my concern about it.
Minimum well depth is 25 feet, it says.
So of the 45 houses in that neighborhood, right around Gage and the other street that's connected here, they've been evenly dispersed, just built every couple of years through the 50s and 60s. With about 8 built in the 70s and 80s. So it's been a gradual progression.
So they're 60, 70 years old.
So some of them predate 1960, so, yeah. And then any changes to that.
So when was this ordinance put in with the 25,000? Is that 87?
Looks like it was 72.
72.
First, because that ordinance was in place at the time, some version of that ordinance was in place at the time of the 1987 variance request. There was an amendment to the ordinance in 89 for the overall district, so there may have been some tweaking of the language, but you can see in that variance request, it was the same issue as in the zoning ordinance at that time.
So,
I think that was originally 72.
so the intent was to avoid exactly what's going on here.
For new development, I think
Yeah.
is the intent.
Yeah.
New plats.
Yeah, not looking backwards, looking forward.
Yeah.
I mean, what he's requesting is pretty much conforming with most of the properties right immediately nearby.
Well, if you want to maybe walk through the 4 criteria.
Okay.
Is there something exceptional or extraordinary? Is there a right that is preserved, that is shared among nearby properties? Is there no detriment found? Is there not a general problem?
Yeah.
Or we could just make a motion, right?
If you're ready.
Motion to close the hearing.
Okay.
I second
All
that.
right, so I'll second that. So, okay.
Do you have any grandfather clauses that would cover this type of a situation either?
We have a grandfather clause that covers a type of situation that is similar to this, but not quite this. There's a grandfather clause for non-conforming lots because of area or width. But in my interpretation, that running parallel to this one is specific to the issue of water service being provided to the lot. My suggestion would be, in the future, let's merge those things together and make sure we're accounting for these replatted previous non-conforming lots. Make sure that's clear.
Do you guys want to go through the reasons and grounds, or what's your wishes here? You ready to make a motion?
It's
or-
up to these guys. I can make a motion if you want. I'm not a very good motion maker, but I can make one. I guess I only have one question, just for the gentleman in the audience with the trees. I don't want to belabor the tree thing, but Dan Larrabell, right? So when you come in and clear this lot, if you get approved, you don't just drop these trees down.
No.
Are we gonna leave some of those at the back property line is my first question, or you have a plan? Second thing is, you're gonna have a professional come in, take them down with cranes, ropes, chains, the way we do it normally. And then the third and final question is, are you gonna grind the stumps, pull them out?
Yeah, we'll have a professional tree clearing company. They don't want to hit houses, they don't want to hit power lines. What I'd like to see them do is come in with a machine that grabs the tree, cuts it, they can pick it up, they lay it down, and then they chip it. They might even harvest some of the trees, I'm not sure. They will grind the stumps. We need to have the stumps out of there. And so I think that addressed your questions.
Right, but pretty much every tree's gonna be gone because we need that for the drain fields. I wanted to hear you say that, but.
I would like to save trees. I think it's a valuable thing to do. I cannot say that we'll save a tree or 10 trees or no. I'm not sure right now.
Well, part of that drain field system is we want that stuff to evaporate, so we need to clear that shade from that area.
Certainly, and so my expectation is that all of the trees would be cleared, but I'm not 100% confident on that.
Thank you.
Do you have a motion there after that?
Well, sure, I can make a motion. I'll make a motion to approve the request per the applicant based on the submitted application here for the 4 grounds for the variance. I don't think we have any, do we want to add a condition, or should we add a condition that if the water and sewer goes through that area, it has to be hooked up, or?
I think that's in the ordinance already, and if they run water and sewer, they have to connect.
Not in the zoning ordinance, but it may be in the engineering rules that are adopted from the city of Grand Rapids water system. I guess I would just phrase that in a way that says, recommend, require a future public water connection consistent with the requirements of the city of Grand Rapids. Because ultimately, this is their system, and they make the call when people have to go.
The one over on Elm Ridge that we had 2 years then, if they were within 200 feet of water or sewer, they had to connect.
Okay.
And I don't know if that was our ordinance or if that was Grand Rapids that specified that.
Yeah, that sounds like a Grand Rapids distance-based.
If you're within 200 feet of a main, whether it's water or sewer, you have to connect.
Yeah, that sounds like something that comes from the Grand Rapids rules. Remember, we just adopt Grand Rapids rules for public water, so you can, I don't think it hurts to have a condition that you'll require that connection if water comes through. But that, just remember, that's going to be underarching the rules that Grand Rapids has about their connections.
Right, but I think that has to be in there because it kind of protects our concerns about the size, our zoning. So I think I'd like to add that as a condition.
How do you enforce that?
If water and sewer are available, they have to connect.
Correct.
How do you enforce that, though? If they're just building a home and going to sell it, so the person buys it, 2 years from now, water and sewer come through, and someone comes in and says, oh, by the way, they made a deal with the city to put a hookup for you, and they go, you know,
I'm gonna assess everybody in that
yeah,
neighborhood.
okay.
Yeah, yeah, I think, yeah, so let's just add that. There's my motion.
Okay.
A mess,
Do we hear a second?
Second.
Second by Elena. Okay,
You get a second?
yep, Elena. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? It's passed. So just need a signature up here with Roger.
Well, it's almost back out.
Okay, have a good evening.
Some of the issues we have with this in South Walker, those are small lots.
There's an old plat called, what's actually called the Fensky plat off of Riverbend, on the north side, west of Wilson. You have a very similar parcel fabric. That was an old plat that was actually zoned S. It's planned for the same kind of density, but we still want to have public water out there, so we're gonna butt heads with that issue if somebody proposes to develop there. So, it's not quite the same as here, because there's unplatted areas there. We still have more leverage over, but kind of a similar scenario, there's no public water.
Anything coming up?
Just a sign variant, I don't want to say just, but there's a sign variance request coming up on the 24th. That's all I'll say about it. I'll get some materials about a week from now, and
Okay.
that'll be that. But I imagine that'll be a lot shorter of a meeting, so thanks for toughing this one out. Appreciate everybody sticking around and having good things to say. Next week, Wednesday at 5 o'clock, if you want to head to Fire Station 2, any Walker resident, but especially if you have interest in South Walker, topic of recent conversation, we'll be having our master plan open house regarding everything more or less south of O'Brien Street. We're actually focusing on areas that are defined by the census, so we're going all the way up to Standale and some parts of it, but the focus will be on some of those big areas within South Walker.
Okay, motion to adjourn? Roger, second by Randy.
I got it.